Hello, Santiago amigos, and welcome to episode 18 of The Old Man and the CV. In this episode, we're talking about mental burnout, executive coaching, creating some mojo on your CV, and getting through those interview hurdles. It's a packed episode, so let's get on with episode 18. So we're delighted to be joined by Phil Sterne for this episode. Phil helps people find their career mojo by holding up a mirror and asking the questions that no one else will ask to unblock the blockers that you didn't know you had. Phil, welcome.
Thank you, Andy. How are you doing?
All right, thank you. So intriguing. Before we get into that, can you just tell our listeners a few of the key highlights of your career, just to give them some background?
Sure. So I've got 25 years in the recruitment industry in some shape or form. And that started back in the late 90s as a recruitment consultant. And then I took a series of different roles in industry. What everyone ends up asking me about is the recruitment manager role at Alton Towers. Yes, I did get to go on the rides and all of that. Did a couple more roles like that, sort of shaping recruitment teams and processes and systems and tools and methods of working, and set myself up as an independent contractor and delivering change projects. In the same kind of vein, I think I just realized that I really enjoyed that change and implementation process more so than the business as usual stuff that inevitably followed it. So, let me in, find out what's not working properly, make some change, embed it, move on. And it just sort of felt like all roads led to this point. And I set myself up as a CV writer and career coach. And that's what I've been doing for the last 3 years.
Right, thank you for that. And good inside track and knowledge that I'm sure will help a lot of our listeners. So you had a long career. You worked for some amazing organizations. I mean, you mentioned Alton Towers and Amazon there, as well as the other industries. And you kind of went, so enough's enough, right? I've had enough of this.
Mm-hmm.
We've spoken to lots of guests who almost had meltdowns or burnouts and just went, I need to change my life. And a lot of our listeners have gone through similar experiences. But tell us about your decision and why you made it.
Well, I went through that. In fact, I'd been through that a couple of times. So once when I was at a company called Unipart, and I was recruitment manager for them across the UK. I had some kind of a breakdown. It was awful. I had to take a bit of time off. I came back okay, but I'd had a conversation with my wife in the meantime where she'd said, why don't you just go out on your own? And after some sort of thinking and research and cajoling, that's when I started doing the contracting work. With Amazon, it was a great place to work, mostly for 2.5 years, but it was tough. And there was a lot of travel, and the standards the expectations were enormous. I just totally burned out. I ended up having 3 months off work, and I couldn't go back. And I don't mind, I talk about it a lot on LinkedIn. It was a proper mental health blackout, numbness. Couldn't do basic things like make an easy meal. It was awful. So through the counselling that I did, that kind of led me to this place of going, right, well, what is it, or why is it, why am I here? It sounds like a big question, but I kind of use some of the Simon Sinek start with why theory to kind of work sort of backwards from why I'm here, and what that led to was me doing the career coaching and what is now effectively executive coaching aside from careers, because I realized that actually what I really enjoyed was working one-to-one with people or in small groups on shortish turnaround projects, where I can sort of quickly gauge what's happening and whether or not I'm doing a good job. And that's the reviews have told me that I have been, which is kind of the opposite of what I was experiencing at Amazon.
I think it's very interesting. I think that burnout message will resonate with a lot of people, because I'm generalizing, but mental health now is much more, mental health awareness is much more prevalent in our children, if they're teenagers or in their 20s, than it certainly was for our generation. And I think there are a number of people that have gone through very similar challenges, but it's almost not talked about openly, because, well, look, work's hard, it's stressy, crack on, and then get back on with it. And I think many listeners will feel, do you know what, I've done that. That's what happened to me. So thank you for being so candid and honest about your own experiences. But one of the good things is that you took all this experience, you started coaching, creating this CV mojo, but you mentioned the pandemic because you got involved with, and forgive me, I can't remember the name of the organization that works with the job centers. And you did some specialist coaching, didn't you, sort of during and just post the pandemic, because of these such unusual circumstances the world and candidates and companies were finding themselves in. What tell the listeners what you did there and some of the success stories that came out of that.
Well, it was a company called CTech, and there's a few of these different providers around the country. They pick up the government contracts basically, so I was contracted to them. Their client is the DWP, and they have a whole bunch of different programs running at any given time to support job seekers with employability skills generally. So these things are just sort of out there, and whether that's providing them with career advice or CV support or whatever. What CTech recognized was that there was a need for what they called executive clients, or support for their executive clients, because they were finding that more and more of their referrals from the job centre were in the 40k plus salary bracket. So they called that the executive level. In reality, this was sort of managers, sort of senior individual contributors, all the way up. I mean, I worked with a guy that was used to earning 400 grand at one point. These are people that they weren't necessarily expecting to get through that program. So what I did is I put together for them a program of career discoveries, like a couple of discovery calls where it was like, okay, what's the actual issue here? Let's try and help you get back on your feet. What is it you want? What is it you're good at? Where can you add value? Sort of rebuild confidence. That was supported by a CV deep dive, and that's kind of been my bread and butter over the last 3 years. So CV deep dive, where we really unpicked what they'd done in their careers, the achievements they'd had, the values that they had, what motivated them, really kind of lift the bonnet, if you like, and have a good look under that, but then replay it to them in the CV. So they would end up looking at it and go, oh, okay, I recognize now, I see myself in this. So this has been hiding, under the surface. So it's a real journey of discovery for a lot of those participants. And then we bolt onto that interview coaching. So quite a number of these folks that we worked with hadn't been interviewed for years, had never needed to be. A lot of them never needed a CV. So we saw, and I say we because I had a couple of guys, I brought a couple of guys on to help me with this. Around 50 people over the course of about a year, taking various bits of this program. And we saw some real kind of mindset shifts in those individuals. A lot of them got new roles. A lot of them, I mean, one of the biggest measures was in the interviewing skills bit, where I was asking them, so 1 to 5, how confident are you in interviewing? And some would say, well, 1, absolutely horrific, and would take them on that journey. But there was a number that said, well, 4, I reckon I'm pretty good. You just get me in the room and you do the coaching with them, and they kind of have a dose of reality, because nobody's actually ever given them the objective feedback, and they realize actually that they were maybe holding themselves back with the belief that they were nailing interviews, but they weren't. They just weren't kind of addressing the questions that were being asked properly, and for want of a better phrase, selling themselves or storytelling with any in a compelling way.
So that's going to be fascinating. So what we're going to do, as per normal listeners, is we're going to put Phil's details in the episode notes, and anything around coaching and creating some mojo from the CV and maybe some interview coaching. We'll put Phil's details in there so you can contact him direct through LinkedIn, and please feel free to reach out to him through there, because I'm sure that this is something that, again, is going to resonate with a lot of people. So if there's just one thing you'd like our listeners to take away from your episode, what would that be?
If it was one thing, it would be about CVs and tailoring them to the application. So I've been a recruiter on the recruitment consultant side. I've been a recruiter in a company. I've been a hiring manager. I've been a contractor, and I've been an employee. So and an interviewer. I've seen this from all angles, and the consistent thing as a recruiter that I've seen that's frustrated me the most is receiving CVs and looking at it and going, and this is relevant for this job. How, right? Recruiters, hiring managers are not mind readers. So it's absolutely imperative that you look objectively at your CV, or get somebody else to do it. I'll do it, of course. Look objectively at your CV, look objectively at the job advert or the description that you're applying to, and ask yourself if the things that are being asked of you in the application, are they represented in the CV? Absolutely yes or no. If they're kind of half alluded to, or they're in your head, or you think, oh, well, because I've done that job, they'll know that means this. No, that's no good. It needs to be absolutely in black and white, the thing you did with an outcome that is relevant to that point in the advert. Otherwise, the synapses do not connect.
Drops of wisdom. Thank you very much indeed, Phil, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise, and thank you for having me on.
Well, thanks for listening once again, Santiago amigos. That's all we've got time for this week. We will see you next week as usual. Just time for the credits. For the music intro and the idents, Abigail, Eva, Molly, One. This is an Most Pro production for 23 Magic, copyright 2023. See you next week, Santiago amigos.